I'm going to call this special meeting of the Board of Directors to order. Let's start with the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right. May we have a roll call, please?
Director Sesenia, Director Cross,
Here.
Director Hubbard,
Present.
Vice President Fourcroy,
I'm here.
President Womack.
Present. Okay, general action items. County fire contract review, Fund 301 fire budget discussion and options.
Okay, we had our prelim budget discussion just a couple of weeks ago. And Matthew thought it was prudent, and I agreed that it'd be good to do a special meeting that focused in on the contract, what the contract says, and then look at maybe some options and or at least think about it. I see this as kind of the kickoff for this discussion, see where we go with and where we end up. Especially, the contract, it's an interesting one. We'll talk about that more as we get into the provisions. So I thought I'd start off with a little bit of background, as for people that may be watching or have read this and don't understand where we came from and where we are today. We've contracted with County Fire for fire and emergency services since 2004. I was talking with Tom a little bit before the meeting. We did have our own fire station personnel when the district initiated, but moved over to CAL FIRE in 2004. So we actually have a contract with County Fire, but County Fire contracts with CAL FIRE to perform fire protection services for the unincorporated areas in the county. So the relationship is a little bit different. We're the only contract like this. The only other public agency that contracts has a similar contract is Pismo Beach, which has a direct contract with CAL FIRE. So we're the only one that have this kind of county CAL FIRE mix. Each year, CAL FIRE provides the district with a schedule of charges, and these are referred to as schedules A through E, which we'll touch on here in a moment. And since, the inception or the, initial contracting date, we've seen fluctuations, but they've been as low as actually no %, but generally around 2 to 4% each other, kind of reflective of CPI. And that, at the end of each fiscal year, there's a true up, which means we pay for actual costs. And of course, that's where we had a little bit of issue the past few years on that true up process. Leading up to that, there has been challenges over the past 6 years. That's about how long I've been here now, with changes, at CAL FIRE, mostly in their headquarters. We've had a couple of battalion chiefs, but that's been fairly stable. But they've had some issues with accountants and other division managers. And, John Owens has been a great unit chief, but he's only been in that role for a few years. The unintended consequences of that dispute that we had with it really, I don't think the county had ever really been involved administratively. They were dealing with CAL FIRE as an agency or a contracted agency. But they started looking at, well, why isn't, Los Osos paying for this, or why aren't they paying for that? So the unintended consequence was that both the county and CAL FIRE are wanting to change some of the terms in the current contract. So we'll jump into the review. And I did want to emphasize, and we'll get to this on some of the financial stuff, the issue we're having with this upcoming fiscal year doesn't reflect any of the changes that are still coming. It doesn't have the higher level of staffing. It doesn't have some of the other things that the county is wanting us to pay for. So really, this is a result of the union negotiations in Sacramento with the fire union, and changes, enhancements in benefits, and increases in wages. So to get
Real quick,
yeah.
do we have a copy of the proposed Schedule A for this year for 25?
That was in the budget, yeah.
Okay.
But do we have them here tonight or no?
I can get those real quick. I didn't know we would need those, the budget stuff.
Well, yeah, okay.
Because we just went through that 2 weeks ago, but if there's certain things you had questions about.
I think it's really
Okay.
important to highlight the differences between the Schedule A that we received this year versus what we've gotten in the past.
Well, it's, if you compare it, and I can grab that one pretty quick. In fact, it's in the ESAC report that's sitting on my desk. That'll show its personnel, which then drives CAL FIRE overhead.
Right.
There's a little bit of the operational thing, the vehicle maintenance and stuff. But then on top of that is a increase, about over 2% increase in the countywide overhead that then adds an additional $120,000 about.
Yeah.
So that's what the difference is right there.
No, I get it. I just, I'm wondering if that would be a good thing for us to be able to look at.
I mean, if you want to look at it, we can, but it's really fundamentally not going to change what we're talking about. Because I do have a slide in here when we get to the financial things that has the summary chart for next fiscal year's budget. And it does compare it somewhat to last fiscal year.
Okay.
Could you talk a little bit more about the fact that our contract is unique? And run that past me one more time, how,
There's, in this county, there's no other contract with, there's only 2 other CSDs that have fire stations.
Right.
That's Cambria and Templeton.
Templeton, right?
All the other unincorporated areas are covered by county fire. Napomo, Oceano now, they used to have their own. So just the way the contract is structured is different in terms of there was a lot of negotiation on trade-offs, and I was going to talk about this as we go through the sections, where services were provided because of our location and our response to like Montana de Oro and the surrounding unincorporated areas. But none of that was really well documented. It was in their initial proposal, CAL FIRE's initial proposal. But that was 21 years ago. All those people some are still around, but none of them are still employed. So, we're dealing with, year 2025.
Do Cambria and Templeton contract directly with CAL FIRE?
No, they have their own fire stations.
Okay.
And the Pismo
okay.
is the other public agency that does directly a contract with CAL FIRE.
So, okay, I'm just wondering, county overhead being such a huge part of this increase, can we go straight to CAL FIRE?
I've asked him that, and preliminary estimations, it wasn't the official, showed that we would be paying more than we are now
Okay,
because of how they structured their deals. They're contracting, I think Pismo's operating under, because they've been with them so long. Now what CAL FIRE is requiring is much different.
okay, we may hear discussions in Pismo then maybe about.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
But we could pursue that. I didn't list that as an option, but we could get.
I'm just, at this point, yeah, all options have to be
Yeah.
looked at.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Let's jump in here, in sections 1 and 2, authorization, declarations, and purpose of the agreement. The thing I pulled out here, the key purpose cited in 2B4 is to provide mutually advantageous fire and emergency services through effective consolidation of organization to perform any emergency work or emergency service. And then it goes on. But the thing here is mutually advantageous. And I think that was the spirit of the contract we have right now, is that the unit chief at that time, Dan Turner, understood the value of our location and the things that we could provide the county. And that's kind of gotten lost in the mix, especially with county admin now being involved. The agreement was structured to recognize, like this, what I was just saying, to recognize the benefits to the county and the state would receive by having the station 15 in their mix for emergency response. And like I said, that's to the adjoining unincorporated, that's the county, and to Montana de Oro, that's the state. The benefit to the district was financial considerations for services. We would have fire marshal, the mechanic services be included as part of the charges and not paying, we don't pay dispatch fees, and the state actually pays for the battalion chief's salary. And that was kind of how the structure was made for that mutually advantageous.
Are any of those parts actually in the contract? What you just
It's
said?
in the proposal. It's not in the contract. That's what's so why it's such a weird contract. It's not really spelled out in the contract, but the proposal that was given to the district at that point in 2004 to 2003, that's where it's spelled out, and it's kind of buried in there. I've had to read that proposal a few times to really understand, where all this came from.
So it's kind of we have basically something in place that's been going on for 20 years, give or take, but we don't have a contract that like actually spells out those divisions or those trade-offs that were made basically in 2004, right?
Correct. And that's where it's unfortunate that it wasn't better documented.
Well, it was in the proposal, and that's what we responded to.
Right.
Um,
And I've, in the past 3 years, when I've been going through the circles with the county mainly, it took CAL FIRE, the current CAL FIRE people a while to understand. But now, again, we'll get into how they kind of, here, let's just keep going here because I'll get to
Sure.
some of these things. So then basically Schedule A lays out the charges for management and operations, the cooperative operations, personnel, that's the key, facilities. I did in the body of the report give you just like a really short summary of each of these, like management and administration summarize the responsibilities between both parties. The cooperative operations, the use of Los Osos CSD equipment as part of the regional protection model. That means we will respond as part of the bigger protection model. Personnel that we pay or reimburse 100% of all the agreed staff and that type of coverage. Because we do have a higher level of service or medical service than any other, actually some communities. With advanced life support, we always have 2 paramedics on duty. For instance, Pismo has none. They're all basic life support. And they rely on the ambulance service. And then you get out, Napomo has 1 paramedic, and then you get outside of that and the rest is basic life support, Cayucas and others. So we pay extra for that. The fire apparatus, that it's this district's responsibility for all equipment and vehicles, which we do. That the emergency response, we respond out to CSA 9I, which is east of town. I forget exactly how far it goes out. I think it's about to Paradise. Side street somewhere right in there's the boundary. We do get some compensation. We'll talk about revenues when we get to that. And the support services, they are supposed to be providing us with an assistant, office assistant position, and that's been vacant for at least 2 years, maybe longer. So that's what Schedule A is. That's kind of the meat of the contract because that's where your personnel costs. No, that's all right. I explained that's where the major cost is. That's the personnel piece. The other pieces are relatively minor compared to that. Schedule B, I didn't even list thing. It's kind of a laundry list in the contract of things, resources that both personnel and equipment that CAL FIRE has at their disposal to assist us in case of emergencies. So it's quite extensive, but that's what that's about. Schedule C is basically looking at our operations, how we run, how we budget for the actual, we're responsibility for everything from water, electricity down to buying toilet paper for the fire station up there. And that's our It outlines that in Schedule C, and all other operational expenses, computers, communication equipment, et cetera. The facility, Station 15, can be used by the district, county fire, or CAL FIRE, for no additional cost. So again, it's in a place for them to meet or have park other resources. Again, it's kind of repetitive. All apparatus and vehicle costs are on the district. And this includes rescue and medical aid services. And that we fund the reserve program. They administer it at no additional cost, the reserve program, but we pay, of course, for the actual employees. There are employees. Schedule D is basically, it outlines what we don't pay for a mechanic, and they do pay for some of the service on our fire engine and other vehicles, which again is a trade-off. That's one of the things they're looking at wanting to charge us for, is a part of a mechanic. So that's maybe one of the up and coming things we'll see. But basically, that's just outlining how we maintain the vehicles and what they do and what we're responsible for. And then finally, Schedule E is just the insurance requirements that we insure. The district insures all the vehicles and the reserve firefighters. Any questions on those?
So we have more paramedics than most unincorporated areas, other areas, some
Absolutely.
cities, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's an extra expense. I guess, I mean, I don't want to sound cold. I wish there was some way to measure the effectiveness of that.
Well, and the value is every time we leave our service area, there's a benefit to wherever those vehicles are going, because they have advanced life support on them. And we're what they call I have the term in here somewhere. They have to backfill. When we leave, they have to backfill, but that backfill can take a while to get here, and they're not advanced life support. So that's another nuance.
Okay, I thought I heard the word benefit and I was trying to square that. We lose our
Well, no,
paramedics.
the benefit is for whoever we respond to
Exactly,
in
exactly.
the
Okay.
unincorporated area or
Okay.
the state park.
Well, traditionally how this worked is there's pieces that we kind of received, and then there's pieces we gave. And that was kind of one of the pieces that was why it was one of the reasons why I've asked for logs for the last 3 years, and they only come maybe once every 6 months. But where are we responding to?
You've been
and
good
who's
about trying to
coming
keep a
back?
handle on this, yeah.
Well, but it's nearly impossible to.
It seems like, yeah, this is just, wow, okay.
So we'll kind of work through the last few sections of the contract. The term is perpetual in nature and subject to Section 6. So I moved Section 6 onto this slide just so you could see what the terminations are. Either party may terminate with 1 year written notice termination. If we fail to pay, they can terminate. And we can't be making agreements, changing the agreement if it impacts the master agreement between county and CAL FIRE. Now, the next one is another one. The annual update in Section 5, and this has been my bone of contention with them for the whole time I've been here. When I first got here, Chief Jalbert was the unit chief, and that was the last time we received, July 2020, an actual following of the contract, because the way the contract reads, we are supposed to meet in January to agree upon the costs and levels of service coming up for the following fiscal year. And that was a formal letter submitted by CAL FIRE saying, here it is. And then there was a formal action by the district saying we accept. And so that hasn't happened since July 20. And I'm lucky to get the budget or the Schedule A charges in, in time for the preliminary budget in May. It's usually on the Friday before or when the packet goes out, and I've got to plug everything in. So this has been really hard to manage. And I keep pointing out that it's in the contract, but it's been fairly, ignored basically.
Well, I think one piece I want to add there is you talked about the unit chief. We have John Owens at this point, but that position has been, I mean, in general, we've had a really hard time with communication up until fairly recently.
Right, Chief Owens, yeah, he's done a great job on getting back on track on communication, but he's got issues, like I said, in headquarters.
Well, he inherited, so
Yes.
we had Scotty Jalbert and then Eddie Moore, and that's kind of when we discovered these overpayments, and that was a really difficult relationship to get anywhere with, basically. And then he abruptly left, and John Owens was thrown in that spot, so things were just completely chaotic for.
And he was interim for quite a while before he was actually
So,
chosen. Yeah.
There's that piece of it too, is that it's been really hard, especially for Ron, for, like in 2022, 23, 24, basically, to get anywhere with this.
Yeah, this sounds like more than the fact that they haven't had the executive assistant in the contract for the last couple of years. I mean, this is deeper than that.
No, this goes back, and Matthew was involved when we first
Mhm.
got some odd answers from their head accountant. And when we kept pushing and pushing, all of a sudden she went on a medical leave and then left. So, and then, it culminated by us hiring Eric Cleveland, a former CAL FIRE employee that handled all the Schedule A charging for them to then start to respond, because he actually knew what he was talking about. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't tell you what was wrong. But they're supposedly straightening that out, except then our Schedule A for next fiscal year showed up. And when I started looking at it more closely, I goes, something's wrong. And so just intuitively looking at it. And then I got a hold of Rob Jenkins, and he looked at it because he knew he's kind of training to move into a more administrative role. And he goes, oh, this is wrong by about $400,000. So there's still issues. What I'm saying is there's still issues going on.
Well, and there's zero continuity,
Right.
basically. Like everything that had happened prior to 2022, basically like went out the door. And then it's been this catch up ever since.
Right.
But that just seems so odd with an agency, that there's not some kind of baked in institutional.
I mean, my
roadmap.
sense was that there were individuals who dealt with this yearly and knew what to do. I mean, when we talk about Schedule A, we get Schedule A. It's a budgetary number. We're gonna get. That was the whole issue, is that we should only ever pay what it actually costs to provide the service, and the budget is every employee at the most expensive rank that they could possibly be.
Right.
So yeah, it's my impression was that it was like one or two people that had done this for years and years and years, and they weren't there, and then it just went away, and people were grasping at straws.
Continuity is the good word. It's like when Eric Cleveland left, I forget exactly. I think it was right when I started noticing the problem. I think it was like 2017. He said, yeah, no one even asked me to help train.
And that, coming from a career with government service, that is a typical downfall, is bringing people on board to train adequately before someone retires. Okay.
Yeah. And this is the most important clause to me. It says in the annual update, should the parties fail to reach agreement on the terms of the schedules, the failure to reach agreement will be documented by Los Osos CSD in writing, and writing will constitute a 1-year written notice to terminate this agreement. So if we disagree, or they disagree, you automatically trigger, or it can just trigger termination, 1-year termination notice. And in my opinion, this doesn't give us much leverage. But that's to be seen, because again, we can't negotiate about what they paid their people. And our
Right.
fundamental problem right now is that salaries and overhead, mainly salaries. When you see on the Schedule A, it went up about over $700,000. Some of that is overhead, but majority of it's salary.
But that should be easily documented.
Well, right, but that's why what we're talking about tonight is how do we respond to that? Because we know that that is not a negotiating point, but if we're like, Chief Owens has said, well, they want to negotiate this next fiscal year on these other things they want us to pay for. So we haven't gotten to that point yet.
And that's where the real difficulty lies, with the inconsistencies of the numbers they've given us in the past. The flat out errors.
So we'll move on. There's just a few more, not really that, in my mind, the meat of it does say that you can make amendments and, if it's agreed upon, but again, that, we talked about that before. And that can be done during that, supposed January check-in, if we want something else or we need something changed, that's the time when we would come to an agreement, as long as it doesn't change the master agreement. And then the other sections are I just call them administrative and standard contract clauses. But then the other big one, and I didn't really highlight it here, is the performance measures that are at the very, very end. I don't know how many pages. And I've gone through that with the battalion chief that was here when I first got here, George, and I forget his last name, Huang, I think it was. And then with Paul and with Chief Owens, is the performance measures are out of date. And they haven't been hitting most of them in terms of what they're even administratively, not having an office tech up there has pushed a lot of that work over to Laura and myself to do. So anyway, there's the performance measures are a whole different issue outside of the contract, even though they're referenced in the contract. And again, those can be changed or modified during the January, when we're looking at cost and level of service stuff. So that's the contract. Any questions on the contract before we move into some of the other issues or stuff there?
So going back to the salaries, is there a way, so they just plugged in the highest possible salary? Is there a way for us to verify what the actual salaries were and that we're being charged what the actual salaries are?
Well, and that's been a difficult, when I first got here in 2019, I got the first invoice in, I think it was January of 2020. And it was for like over $1 million and all it was an invoice. And I said, well, what am I paying for here? And crickets. And then COVID hit and the crickets went even quieter. So, not to be in default, I paid it, but that's when I, during COVID started really digging in, going, what's going on here? So that's the background. Moving forward, I'm starting to get better information, but Eric Cleveland told me we need to be getting it's a form called AO17, which then documents who worked, how much they worked, and what they were paid. What I get is the summary of the AO17, so I'm not seeing the actual physical. So it's better than it was, but it's still not where I think it should be.
And there's a little, well, it seemed like the wiggle room there was having personnel information. I know we asked for that multiple times and it was, it's like, well, that's sensitive information that we're not going to send out.
Yeah, but I've seen the AO17s now.
Yeah.
So I know there's nothing on there. I mean, it might have a name and their salary, but it doesn't have like social security number or.
Right. I mean, sensitive, there's certain set of information and we're paying for
Right.
this salary and we need to know.
Mhm.
the classification, the hours.
Now, as long as we've identified the issue for them, it was in their accounting and the way the paperwork was being shuffled wasn't shuffled correctly. And according to Eric Cleveland, the way even overtime and just it's complicated because it's a fairly steady staff up there, but it does rotate, especially on overtime, if overtime's required. And if they don't fill out their timesheet correctly and the person checking the timesheets don't really look at them. That's where a lot of the errors started happening. Incorrect timesheets and incorrect, documentation of their time.
Mm.
So
Is that because they don't have an office person?
well, no, this would be done by a different person. The office
Okay.
person wouldn't be checking those. It'd be the division chief, which I think we've had 4 since I've been here, and each time they change, I meet them once and I never see them again.
Mm.
That's such a basic fundamental proper documentation of time.
Right. So hopefully they recognize that. John Owens does understand that. They've hired a new accountant, hopefully being trained. And that should help with the true up, because that's where it comes down to, the thing that tipped me off is I noticed in our audited financials, we were paying exactly what was on the original Schedule A, and I go, that can't be, And so that was, to me, an obvious issue. So, yeah. Any other questions on contract? And as you can see in some of the points I brought up, it's not clear cut on all the trade-offs and the mutually beneficial things that were negotiated back in 2004.
Actually, I do have a question about that. Do we have that documented anywhere?
All we have is the proposal.
And that is comprehensive and it covers all of the different pieces that we
Yeah,
give
but
and they
it's
give.
not as straightforward as you would think.
Yeah.
It's fairly thick, because at that time, I think there was 2, I'm trying to remember, I haven't looked at it recently, 2 different options that the district could choose. And so that's where it can try to follow the threads down through the way the proposal is written.
Well, I know when we get in these discussions, I'm having a hard time following what exactly all the pieces that we, like those negotiations, those pieces that like we provide for instance, we provide the vehicle for the chief, but the chief gives us, but we don't pay for him.
But see, that's in the proposal.
Okay, but as a for instance, there's a bunch of those pieces,
Right.
About dispatch, about multiple things, and then there's what's been going on, and then there's what they're wanting us to pay for now,
Right.
And I think at some point would be really helpful to have like that in one place so we can kind of see what's happening.
Well, I think John Owens has tried to map that out.
Because I'm having kind of a hard time following that piece of it, and that's what I'm in my brain at least trying to like even them up, like, well, is this what we used to do or what we have been doing or what we're going to do? Because there's an awful lot of that stuff.
Right. The only thing that kind of changed, and this was back in 2013, because we've been operating under the proposal conditions, still are today. And like I said, the costs are just changing. The only thing that got slipped in there, and there's no documentation of why, in 2013, when the contract started, there was no countywide overhead on it because CAL FIRE was handling it. And according to Dan Turner, the unit chief at the time, the county CEO and him talked, they go, well, no, CAL FIRE, you're handling this. We won't charge countywide overhead. At some point in 2013, that changed and it started showing up as a fixed cost, 3.5%. And that was applied every year until 2 years ago. And that's when county admin said, no, you've got to be paying the prevailing countywide overhead, not that fixed. So that's the only thing that's actually physically changed. Today.
Is there any
Yeah.
documentation of what's changed at the county in terms of oversight? I mean, we
No.
didn't used to pay and
Well,
now we
they-
do, and
well,
what are
well-
they doing to earn that?
I don't know what happened in 2013. But I think it was just, they're handling this like any contract that the county enters into, they apply countywide overhead to. And to me, it's a magic number. I worked for the county for 4 years. I understand at least how Public Works calculated it. And it's got some math behind it, but it's just supervisors saying, well, this is how much time I, provide to projects that aren't covered by other. Anyway, and I've argued and they actually adjusted it a little bit. And I have to say, John Owens is trying to get them to just say, don't charge it and let's use that money for actual fire protection and medical services.
It sounds like the convenience fee on your credit card or where it's convenient for us to charge you a fee.
Well, and it's the way they charge it too. I mean, Schedule A has typically it's about a 12% overhead charge on their labor and everything else. Then county doesn't come in and just charge it on that base. They charge it on top of the countywide or state overhead. So we're paying overhead to them for overhead.
Well, that piece is important, right? So we're paying like the the staffing, the prevention service, all of the personnel costs. Then we're
Right.
paying variable rate, but plus or minus 12% of, and that's just CAL FIRE administrative.
Right. And that's CAL FIRE at the state level.
But then we're paying 3.5% of the 12%.
Or on top of the 12%.
Well, they're taking whatever that number is.
Right.
There's like the actual staffing costs plus the 12%.
Right.
Then we're paying 3.5 on that whole thing.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And now this fiscal year was 4.7%. And next fiscal year, I think it's 6.7. So
Let's support Mr. Owens in his efforts to
right.
put some good use to
Well, I
that.
did have a short meeting with the new CEO, Matt Pontus, and he's taken it under consideration. I just have to get back with him.
Well, before we leave the actual contract,
Mhm.
maybe from our council, I mean, you've reviewed this contract. Do we, is what Ron's saying, I'm sure that you guys have talked, but basically we either take it or leave it, essentially? Or do we have the ability to say, push back and say, wait a second, show your math on some of this stuff?
I do think that there's an ability to push back
Mhm.
to some extent, because the contract does say that the CSD pays actual cost. So this concept of we're going to kind of just take this generic rate and say that's what you pay is not really, to me, what I read to be the intent of what the CSD's payments are for Schedule A services. So I do think that actual cost wording is helpful to the district. There's not a lot in here that is helpful to the district, but actual cost is a good word in section 9A.
Mhm.
It's, in my experience, it's like a lot of 20-year-old agreements that people just sort of know there's an agreement out there, but we're going to do it the way we've always done it. And so the activities of all three parties have kind of evolved, but the agreement is this perpetual agreement that doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the times. Because I'm sure their response to my point about actual cost is going to be, well, we've never done that before, that we can't do that anymore. It's not the way we account for things.
Mhm.
That that's problematic. And what's really problematic is anytime you really push on a contractual provision, in a negotiation or in asking somebody to back something up, you really have to have an or else. Like, if you don't do this, we're going to do this.
Mhm.
And you know, as you know better than I do, there don't seem to be a lot of options for what we would do instead. And so that's kind of the problem with pushing back too hard, but I do think, you know, contractual terms have to be given meaning. And there has to be a reason why the parties agreed to actual cost rather than estimated costs or average cost. And that is so that the taxpayers could be shown that they're not getting fleeced. So I do think that's helpful for the district. How helpful CAL FIRE thinks that is, I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, I think you touched on a couple of important things. I mean, that we have this kind of older contract that's maybe outdated anyways. And keeping going down that path and trying to get more, I think we're trying to get more mileage out of it because we think it's advantageous, but I'm not sure if that's true.
Yeah, John Owens is really pushing for, it's even a little more convoluted down in Avila, Shell Beach and Pismo, how they swap things around. And John Owens is trying to get it all written down because it has been kind of the a lot of gray areas.
Mhm.
So I thought in this next part, I would just quickly go through kind of our revenues, you know, because this is our issue, the cost and revenues, you know, expenses and revenues. And I know you guys all know about this, but I thought it'd just be really good to just quickly go through each of these, just quickly. Of course, our main source of revenue is Zone B, property tax. Next to that would be our special fire tax, which is really our only option on raising revenue if the community agrees. CSA 9 property tax, this is one I'm pushing on right now. This is an interesting one. Like I said, it's an area, defined area just to the east of us. It was instituted, I want to say, in 2010 or 2011. So that the properties out there would be protected just because of their distance from the closest station. And so it was a Prop 218, and it is supposed to rise by CPI similar to our tax. But our revenues from that have been relatively flat, and I don't know why. And it's one of those weird things I asked the county about. And I guess it ultimately is over in Public Works because they're the ones that initiated the process. So anyway, I'm going to be digging on that. So, but again, it's not a ton of money, but it could be help.
But I mean, it's on the order of like $30,000.
Yeah, it's been around 28,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's calculated by county and the Public Works Department that,
Yeah, and then that just goes through the county auditor's office and straight to them and applied to our CAL FIRE
whereas like the special fire tax, when we do a cost of living, it goes through us.
no, it all goes through the county.
Okay.
That's another interesting one, but that was because we almost defaulted on payment during the bankruptcy time. And so they arranged, so any money coming in first went to county fire, CAL FIRE, and then the leftover comes to us for the operation and budget for the station, our 301 budget. There is money that comes from the ambulance agreement. Again, it's not very much. And that contract's going to go out to RFP later this year, and I'm not sure how that's going to be handled in the future. And then we've added investment income. You know, that's been a pretty good chunk, but still, again, it only keeps us afloat. So those are our sources of revenue. Here's our reserves. And, you know, this is the good news. You know, we've got $3 million in reserves, and we have $3.1 million in unassigned cash. So we have, you know, $6.1 million, $6.2 million of money. So that's the good news in terms of.
That is unassigned cash. That's district wide. That's not
No,
Fund
that's
301.
for this fund,
That's just for this fund.
right?
But
Okay.
we have a serious amounts of money to spend on the firehouse.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I
Well,
just
I
want
mean,
to,
like we have
Right, and
unassigned right
we're
now, but-
moving towards, for full-time, regular positions, and those are the things that are, um, I'll get to this, but I am working on what it'll take for the special fire tax, how much you'll have to go up. I'm pretty darn close. I think I have the Margetson stamp of approval, which helps. But this is our reserve situation. So, like I said, the contracting had been fairly consistent along the lines of CPI. We're going to be in a deficit for the first time coming up this next fiscal year. And this is where I, wanted to note we are hoping to have higher staffing levels and fire station improvements that have been discussed in the past. And that will be something that can go into the special fire tax increase. I've left it out for right now because the station, it was I think it's 3.2 million in the building assessment. That's definitely has gone up 3.5 to 4 probably by now. We'll have to get those numbers updated. And then I haven't run the numbers for the fourth position, but we saw kind of what we were seeing now is that the work week for CAL FIRE went from 72 hours to 66, which means you added a position in which is three people for a position because of overtime for vacation, sick, and other things. That's just the way the formula works. So anyway, we saw the result of that, and I don't know if I've put it in here. I might be a little bit later, but anyway, we'll move on. This goes to what you're hopefully showing what the budget looked like in comparison. It's not exactly the Schedule A, but you can see the services and supply budget. That's where the contract is. And that 655,000 is less because we cut about, if you recall, over 50,000 out of operational budget to try to make up a piece of that over $700,000 increase in the Schedule A.
So where's the Schedule A in this?
It's in services and supplies. It's a contract service.
Okay, because, I mean, just a few years ago, right, that was below 3 million.
Oh, yeah. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
Like
I
I
think
have
for the
23,
20
24, and it was 2.5.
for the, if from the audited financials from 23, 24, we had an excess after paying of revenue. We had over $600,000. And then that more than paid for operations up at the station. So if you do a straight calculation, it's over a 40% increase.
And that's mostly in personnel, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Plus the county charging an ever increasing amount
Right.
on countywide overhead from
Correct.
3.5% to, I think the latest one was like 6 point something.
6.7.
6.7.
So this is our problem, the net revenue versus expenses at the very bottom. So options. And of course, the obvious one is increased special fire tax. Currently for a single family dwelling, it's $105.90. I'm working to get the projections out because this is going to be the key on what we're looking at, but it's going to be a significant increase to be able, and I looked at 10 years and that may be too far out in terms of crystal ball, so I might shorten it to a 5-year because that might be driving some of when you're starting to add inflation at the tail end. Also, it's looking like, could be over 100% increase in the
Oh, that was what I was gonna ask. What's the ballpark? 100%.
over 100%. And of course, we'd have to Prop 218 on that. And I was going to ask you this, Craig, is an existing tax in, that's an existing tax and it's increased, is that subject to the 2/3? Or does it have a different threshold?
That would be the same
Same
threshold
threshold.
for an increase.
That's what I was afraid of. Yeah. Okay, so that's the obvious one, increased special fire tax.
But that doesn't, I mean, that's based on like this, because they're gonna ask for more money next year.
Mhm.
I mean, there's gonna be more things they're gonna try to add into this next year,
Right,
right? So, I mean, we're not even.
right.
So to me, like if we went down that path, I mean, it seems like we really need to iron out what what is this contract and what are we paying for? And we better start getting what we're paying for. One way or another.
You know, I agree. It's just, we're in it's difficult because, $445,000 deficit, we can weather some deficit, but I don't want to weather it for very long. So do we do our best estimate or do we wait until we absolutely know? That could be a year and a half from now.
I guess I'm not, that wasn't my point really, I guess. My point was that if we were to increase the special fire tax to maintain this contract that is in flux, like it's still not predictable, right? We aren't having a good idea of what we're going to be dealing with in 26, 27. It'd be hard to go ask the community for that much money if we don't have a clear idea of what
Well-
our contract's going to be and
Well-
what we're paying for, and are we getting what we're paying for?
My response to that would be that we aren't going to go immediately out and ask, but we need to start the dialogue with the community. And
Mhm.
so if we base it on our best estimation at this point in time, it's the dialogue, because I can't see us just rolling this out, in 6 months or, in June, saying, we're going to we need to increase your property tax for special fire tax by 120%. Though I'm looking at a phase in too.
I think I think the expectations of what we're getting, and having it be very transparent about what we're paying for and why. I think those expectations would be much higher. I know my expectations about just documentation about what we just paid for would be much, much higher. Just in general.
Mhm.
How it gets rolled out, I'm not arguing that. I'm
Mm.
just saying that as far as our interaction in this contract with county fire, like the way this has been going since I've been on the board, it has not been great. And then to go ask the community for like double the amount of money is,
You want some certainty locked into that number and that it's gonna provide
yeah,
the services that we think that we expected.
to totally understand that dialogues need to happen and people need to be prepared and we need to start taking our best shots at this. But I guess when I think about that, increased special fire tax means that we're continuing with this contract as it is. And I'm not sure that, like, as it is, it's very vague. I couldn't tell you right now all the pieces and all those trade-offs. And I think maybe you can because you've been looking at it a lot, but it's different than being able to look at it and hand it to somebody.
Well, for me, it's like, going back to the discussion about the AO17 form and who's doing what and who's charging what on our account number, basically. That's still, I get the summaries.
Well, and also the way that that transaction takes place, I think is problematic. Like Craig said before, or else, there is no or else, but we automatically, like, the money, we never get the money. So we can't say, no, we're not going to pay you until you document what we're paying.
Right.
So
Maybe it's time to revisit
That's a
that. I mean, the
huge,
bankruptcy
huge
was a
issue.
long time ago. Yeah, is it possible to revisit that? County gets it.
I probably, I don't know, it was a long time ago. Um, yeah, I don't know.
Anyways, just,
Right.
there's a lot there as far as expectations.
Well,
that
I
feel
think the
like would be
bottom line,
different.
what's happened here is we lost the partnership. We're basically in this relationship now that isn't, it's so weird because you're contracting for a service, you'd think you'd be contracting
And that's the hard part, because there's a lot of trust that's gone away with inaccurate billing and
No transparency, like.
Yeah.
So,
Zero.
we've been talking specifically about keeping the contract with Cal Fire a lot, but there are other options here. I wanna know, I've read these, proposals, but. How do these three other choices, mitigate the issues that we've discussed with Cal Fire?
Well, let's move on. We consider, staffing up and establishing our own department again. We did it before. We moved away from it because it was ineffective and costly. But my understanding, it was partly because of the person running it, the fire chief at the time. I wouldn't, this would be, have our eyes wide open because this would be a heavy, heavy lift just to staff up a fire department and take it on. And I think we'd still need an increase in special fire tax,
certainly,
because,
but
Right.
Templeton and Cambria do it.
right, and I know Templeton struggles.
Okay.
They got their
Okay.
first special fire tax passed in 2019 and it's low. And so they
Oh, so
can't,
just in 2019.
yeah, and so
Okay.
they have trouble with turnover because they can't pay,
Right.
like others.
Yeah, that's been an experiment then.
Right, right.
Okay, just
But they're
don't-
making it. I mean, they're doing it, but it's a struggle.
How much do you think the fire tax would increase for?
That hasn't, I haven't looked at that. I just know, looking at, the fire budget, just what we're looking at, if we stay with CAL FIRE, it's not going to be significantly different, except that the overhead charge would go then towards salaries or equipment or,
And we'd have more communication, we'd have more accountability,
Right.
or potential consistency, depending on how we run it as a board.
Mhm.
Yeah, this looks like, the or else scenario, where we want more information or else
Do it ourselves.
do it ourselves, which again, like Tom just said, we'd have hopefully better communication and better, tracking of the expenses and all that.
oh, definitely. I
Yeah.
mean, that's,
And we have the past history, obviously, of having the fire station under our control before. I don't know if we could run it any better than it was before or not. It sounds like, I don't know, it just sounds like it's a good or else scenario.
I think it's something that we're incredibly capable of, especially since we have a lot of the facilities and equipment already. It's just taking over personnel and organizing. But if we decide to do that, we can talk about it then.
Yeah.
Consider the other two possibilities perhaps.
well, that's why it's on the list. I mean, everything I put on here, has a merit,
Mm.
It has to be discussed.
Right. And, I'm not expecting the board to make big decisions. we need to air this and continue to air it until
The dialogue.
we got it. Yeah.
I do think that reestablishing the fire district under our control, the public will be a lot more supportive of that. I think lately, the public, Los Osos, has heard a lot of, well, we're waiting on the county or we're waiting on someone else. If we can say we're increasing taxes to avoid that, if you can have direct accountability with us, people would be more willing to invest in publicly.
This option is to investigate partnering with another agency. The closest public agencies are Morro Bay and San Luis Obispo. Again, I could see moving away into a different type of partnership where this would be the best way, just then you're involved with another agency's politics and changes, elections, but I think it's a strong option. Again, if or else this would be another option that could at least get us away from county fire.
Have we had any kind of contact with either Morro Bay or San Luis Obispo about this?
A little bit with Morro Bay,
Yeah, that
Um,
seems like the most likely option. They're
you know,
closest.
and I didn't want to take it too far because, until board direction and being
Right.
sensitive, I don't want to.
This is early in the
Right.
discussion, yeah. Okay.
So I guess I'm curious what the costs ballpark of the alternatives are, because if Fire continues to try to push up costs and we know we can do it cheaper a different way, I mean, I think then we know what our trigger point is, where we say this is.
Well, there
This is
definitely,
enough.
definitely haven't had that detail of an analysis, though I can tell you from my just brief discussions with Morro Bay, they provided their staffing costs
Mhm.
by position, and they're quite a bit less than CAL FIRE. And that they operate in is the full regulars as well.
I guess my only concern would be, with Morro Bay would be response time. Where we got, the station here.
Well, no,
Well, we keep that.
we would have a similar
Okay, so
model.
Morro Bay would staff that?
Yeah, Morro
Okay.
Bay would staff it,
Gotcha.
and we'd have a similar relationship that we have with the county right now.
Okay, okay.
My question is why? Like, if they're gonna take care of more Bay, they'd have to increase staff to take care of us as well, I imagine.
Well, no, they'd hire a whole, crew to,
We'd have our own crew here.
So why pay them to manage that crew when we can just manage it? Manage the
Because
crew?
then we don't have to have another fire chief a few
Right.
miles away from Morro Bay. then we
Fire
don't have to have a
marshal.
Fire
Right.
marshal.
There-
right
there's-
there.
Right. We could
There's a
probably
lot
share
of the-
dispatch.
Mhm.
There's a lot of costs.
Overhead goes both ways. I mean, there's, that's why there's the argument to put everything under an umbrella is that you have like this structure that handles a lot of little things. Then the argument against that is that, well, now this umbrella, this infrastructure that you've built of overhead is so unwieldy, you're paying way too much.
Yeah.
So there's
You gotta find
there's
that good spot.
some good spot in there, hopefully,
Mhm.
but
Feels
that's
like
why.
That runs the risk of putting up against the exact same issues we're facing now, in the future, who knows when. Which makes me uncomfortable. I do like the idea of partnering with, Morro Bay or San Luis Obispo, since they're right there. It's a lot, more accountability, a lot easier channels of communication. I can walk there and knock on a fire chief's door if I really wanted to. But that concern of a communication breakdown is still there and worries me.
Well, if we were going to partner with them, I think that would be part of the upfront negotiations would be, this is the problem we were having. We want you on board to alleviate that problem.
Mhm.
Then finally, the nuclear option. um, Is to just divest our responsibilities.
Well, that's the or else, but I mean, is that really something the county? I mean, county fire would not want that to happen, or they do want that to happen?
I get mixed signals. When Wade Horton was there, he says, why do you guys even want to run your own fire station? And I haven't had that conversation with Nat Pontus. So I'm not sure.
Guess then we're not in charge of our own destiny. We just get what they
Well,
give us.
Yeah, I'm not supportive of this, but we have to look at the reality if we can't figure a way out
Mm.
financially. But I don't think we're there yet.
I like our water system better now. It's under our control than the counties.
Mhm.
Exactly, we could do that with fire. Just saying. Fire uses water to put out.
And then one more was said, I think. Bringing this time of night, there was something at the beginning, there was another option one of you mentioned. What was it?
Contracting directly with CAL FIRE.
That's it. Let me write that one down and
Oh, yeah.
let me talk to Owens about that.
Yeah.
Just to know what
Just to know what it
it
is.
is.
Right.
I do fear that would have the same issues that we have now, just We wouldn't have to.
But
have
at
the
least
county.
maybe we'd be getting rid of the county as an arm in that.
Well, that's
Mhm.
six.
Because
We've come to
6.7%.
realize that we can't count on the county for a lot of stuff. I'm sorry I had to say that.
That's why we're here as a CSD, to provide service to our district.
So anyway, just a quick summary, we are fortunate to have robust reserves and adequate cash for right now. I think we need to keep talking about this to get, like tonight, like I said, is the kickoff, but by the end of next fiscal year, we need to have a good plan of what we're gonna do. We might have more clarity on where the county contract's going. I can push on that. So we can work that into the special fire tax formula. What I will do at some point is daylight what I've done so far, so you can see the magnitude, just based on what I did is, did the spreadsheet using next fiscal year as the baseline in those costs, and then projecting out. And again, it's for a conversation, just for information, so you can see, and then all it is, once, we're comfortable with what the spreadsheet is telling us, you just change the numbers as you need, and that'll calculate it. Similar to my rate model.
All right, well, I appreciate you're going over it with us.
So I don't know if
understand.
there's any final direction that you guys want to give me.
Would you
tonight?
like me to take public comment first?
Yeah, let's open it up for public comment.
If you're online, please raise your hand, and if you're in the boardroom, please come to the podium. There is one online. Let me know if you would like to start online or in the room.
Let's start in the boardroom first.
Good evening, my name is Jeff Edwards. Thank you. Good evening, my name is Jeff Edwards, and it's funny, CAL FIRE used to be known as the Costco of firefighting. I'm not sure that's true anymore. I, for one, support the strong consideration of the district going back to staffing the fire department itself. I think the circumstances surrounding the change back in 2013 or whenever it was are different now. But I think it's important to know what those numbers are. So I would urge the district to really do a detailed analysis of what that would look like financially. It's clear that the special fire tax is going to have to be increased, whether you stay with CAL FIRE or whether you pursue this option. In considering a district staff fire department, I think there's an important component that is housing. And if there was some way to link housing with that strategy, I think the ability to attract and retain staff would be greatly enhanced. And I have to say, I don't support the idea of teaming up with Morro Bay or San Luis. San Luis is off the table. Morro Bay is an option, but I believe because of the politics, and frankly, Morro Bay is never really recognized Los Osos as they've never respected Los Osos is my view. And I think it would be, we lose control that we would have otherwise. So again, I support the detailed consideration of a district staffed fire department. What do those numbers look like? What does it translate into a fire tax increase? And I think that would be important and a good direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, our online person?
Yes, Lynette, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Lynette Tornotsky, Los Osos. I'm just wondering, and I can't recall, and I'm sure I have it written down somewhere. What are the increases in the fire tax that we have had over the years? It would be interesting to know how often we do it and how much percentage it went up. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynette.
That's an easy one, Lynette. Thank you. goes up by CPI, Consumer Price Index each year, and the board approves the actual CPI. They did it at the May meeting, just our last meeting, to be included in our budget. So it really depends on what's going on with inflation. The initial fire tax, I think, was in 2005 or six, maybe it was 2006. And then shortly after that, it went up slightly again to pay for that second paramedic position. And so it hasn't changed since then, except for CPI.
And I want to add that $106 a year per parcel is not a lot of money to pay for your emergency services. I think that's
It's $10 a month.
Well,
pretty fair.
especially with the staffing and the level of service that we've been
Right.
receiving this
Right.
whole time, which nobody else has.
There's one more public comment online.
Oh, okay.
All right, I've only got your phone number, so you're available to talk.
It's
Hi, Richard
And Ding-
Margetson.
Okay,
Can
We
you
can hear
me?
you, Richard. Yes, we
we
can.
can hear you. Go ahead.
Sorry, I couldn't be there tonight. I listened to the whole presentation. There needs to be more discussion, and there needs to be more information of how we got to the transition with CAL FIRE in 2004, and what the reasons were that we make sure if we go back to a Los Osos manned station, that we understand that we can't repeat the reasons the community voted down the first fire tax and voted for the second fire tax. It was more than just mismanagement. There were other financial issues. There were no reserves. I'm sorry I couldn't be there. I could talk for 15 minutes on what the presentation was today. But keep in mind what the community voted for back then. Part of what they voted for was the life-saving 2 paramedics on duty 24/7. That was the big thing the community wanted. And that's why we still have the highest level of emergency response medically in the unincorporated area, and probably compared to some of the cities in the county. So keep that in mind when we're talking about making changes or whatever. The community, that's what they voted for overwhelmingly back then. A lot more to talk about. I know there's more discussions on this. I think we can weather this budget a shortfall this year, maybe with contingency reserves or whatever. But I think we got to have the discussion. I think we got to get the numbers out there as accurate as possible, and that makes the community understand that, like Chuck just said, 105 after 20 years, starting at $40, and now we're asking for an increase no matter how we staff the department. I don't think is that big a lift. So anyway, I will definitely try to be at the next discussion you have in this in person. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard.
There's no further public comment online.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board.
Well, I have 3 things. One is my feeling, and this is just my feeling, having talked with and been to some of the trainings at CAL FIRE, is that it seems like that we're just in a different world, regulatory wise, than we were in the early 2000s. Like volunteers used to be potentially a part of a community's fire solution, and that is not the case anymore. That doesn't work. The requirements and the regulations and the trainings required are much higher than they were 20 years ago. And I think we should definitely look into all these options, but I think that is a potential stumbling block for us doing things completely on our own. That said, I think that we need to be able to look at the dollars and the cents on some of these different options. And so I guess my next kind of comment question is how do we do that? We have Ron, but Ron's spread pretty darn thin right now, with as usual. because we're potentially like looking at, and I don't know how we would engage like a Morro Bay or a San Luis to look at those options other than like putting out an RFP and soliciting bids. And I have no idea how we figure out what our own station costs. Maybe we can look at Templeton and look at what their budgets are. But so one, how can we do that? I mean, because it sounds like we need to get moving on some of this. And two, like, what does that look like to engage these other communities? Is that just further discussion? Is that some sort of formal RFP? Do you have a feeling for that?
Morro Bay is pretty easy. I know the fire chief over there. It's really, if we want to engage them, I want to be sensitive to that community, that it's just not all of a sudden Los Osos shows up knocking at the door, you know, so yeah, I gotta think about that. And maybe I should have a dialogue with their chief to see what his thoughts are.
Yeah, and maybe it is some sort of like some sort of formal request for quote kind of thing that includes all of the pieces that we want.
Is there a role for consultant in this to kind of tie this all together? Someone to help you?
Yeah.
Because I mean, Sunnyside's not gonna go away.
We still have Cabrillo Basin, we still have potential water pipeline, we have a few things happening.
Well, let me think about that, and because, standing up the station, I could look at Cambria, Templeton, and really Morro Bay, because they're small. You know, what their budgets look like, what kind of comparison, salary scales, that kind of thing. That wouldn't be that hard. So let me think about that and see if I can figure out, the best way to do that. Consultant, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah,
who-
I mean, I'm
who
just
that
saying
would
that's an
be.
option. If
Well,
that
is
seems
it-
to be a way.
And Eric Cleveland, is it some of the other people
Great.
that helped us in this mess?
I can ask around, because Eric, he was kind of a numbers guy.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's something that would be great if you could bring back is how do we go engage
So-
in these different ways and come down to what it's gonna cost? And who's gonna do that? Do you have enough time? Do you need help to do that, etc.?
Right,
Yeah, I like that idea of getting a consultant.
right. I just don't know where to start looking for that, but I'd have to ask about that as well. So it looks like, we know special fire tax, that was in the options, but let me look at, consider our own fire department, investigate other agencies, and then contact directly with CAL FIRE. Those would be my charges here,
Yes.
my takeaway here, and to look at if we can find assistance if I'm feeling like I can't do it.
I would say
time
see if you
consuming.
can find some assistance.
Yeah.
I would like to see what that looks like.
Yeah, we've talked about that for quite a while. And this might be the area, if there's a consultant out there who specializes in this sort of thing, and there probably is.
Probably.
And kind of that last kind of thing was just, I've touched on it before, but I think it'd be really very, very helpful in all of these discussions if we kind of knew what we were getting, like that list of what does that proposal include and what are these trade-offs that are happening, and what are the asks that we know about so far into the future? Like what is county fire wanting to add in the future that you know about? So we can have a list of things or a document that we can reference back to and compare and contrast with.
Right, and I have a pretty good idea or a list of things what the county's gonna be asking for, but
I'd imagine we could do the same thing with future contract. Morro Bay as well,
I'm sorry.
like. I imagine they're gonna want things as well,
Right, well,
and it will increase after our first year, once like they know what's needed.
well, everyone's costs increase, we know that,
Mhm.
so.
That's where district council writes a really good contract for us.
I do have a fear that, CAL FIRE themselves have complained about a lack of staffing retention due to wages and whatnot. If Morro Bay staff are significantly cheaper, then they're gonna be facing that same problem, and their staffing is gonna increase as well. So we're gonna be right back where we are right now with Morro Bay. It'll just take a little bit longer, so I feel like it's gonna be a Band-Aid that will eventually be just.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know either. You'd have to look at,
we
well,
have to
what are
look at
we gonna pay? How are we gonna retain or be competitive?
Well,
Right.
maybe
And can we
take a look
afford that?
I feel
at
like we're
what-
gonna have to do that no matter what.
See what the difference is of the different San Luis, Templeton, Morro Bay, what do they pay, and
Yeah.
can we put a little buffer, pay a little bit more?
Yeah, probably, just focus basically on Cayucas and Templeton and Morro Bay. I don't think San Luis is a good comparison.
Yeah, Cayucas is already county fire, CAL FIRE.
Oh, I'm sorry. So just Cambria, I'm sorry. That's
I
all.
always mix those two up as well.
Yeah. Yeah, if we get the hard data from them,
Mhm.
at least that would give us an idea of what we would be looking at.
Yeah, and that's easy to get.
Yeah.
So. Okay. Good conversation. Thank you for taking all that in.
Thanks for the excellent presentation.
Yes.
Well, and thanks for, I mean, you've been single-handedly dealing with this basically for 6 years.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I'm glad that we can all kind of get on the same knowledge level and see all the stuff he's been dealing with, because it's gonna get rockier before it gets smoother.
Can't you work 80 hours a week?
No,
Talk to my wife.
I got that answer.
all right, well,
With
anything
that,
else?
I think it's just adjournment.
All right. Anyone else have a comment? All right, I adjourn our special meeting.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks to the public that came in and commented too.